Legends. The podcast about urban legends. And here's your host, that's right, Neil Chris Huntley. Hello and welcome to Urban Legends. We are now into the second series of our podcast, which is exclusively about urban legends, and you will no longer find any information about etiquette here. If you want that, look it up yourself or go and listen back to series 1. I am, as always, Chris Flynn, and I have a little bit of good news to tell you just after I introduce you to the man, the myth, the legend. They call him the king of coupons, the badass of buy to win. It's
they don't have very good English wherever it's here.
Don't know where I'm going. He is king of the sales, the Black Friday bandit. It's Mr. Consumer Advice himself. It is
Neil Herbert.
Hi Neil, how are you doing?
The podcast is already going off the rails, I say.
Yes, the podcast
is very much like that kind of Indiana Jones movie set piece.
Is it?
I'm not sure which one of us is short round. Probably both of us.
Is the podcast full of cheap consumer deals that you've been getting this week?
Piling it high with.
Got your eye on any stuff? Got your eye on any stuff for Black Friday, which has passed now that this is going out afterwards, but. We're recording,
We're recording prior to.
Yeah, because we need to get in shape for Black Friday, obviously.
Well, I would say, it would be a post Black Friday deal, but you could get 50% off this podcast.
Really?
If you listen to one of the previous season 1 episodes.
That's not bad, is it?
That's a tremendous value. Very
nice. And are they also presented by Neil and Chris? Because that's your sign of quality.
Yeah,
no doubt. So have you been going around with your little wallet full of coupons recently down Boundary Road or whatever, getting your deals?
Yep. Bad chicken Kievs, 50p off. That's not bad. Stock the freezer with those.
Oh, with a garlic style butter.
Well, yeah, garlic style butter style. What I like about the
with a garlic style liquid in a chicken style.
Why is liquid in inverted commas? I'm getting really worried now.
Why is style in inverted commas?
Lab technicians have spent hours or years perfecting this.
Not as long as the lawyers have spent on the packaging, though, unfortunately.
No, my favourite thing with those kind of I don't know if they do this anymore actually, but
well, if you don't, who does?
Yeah, exactly. So you obviously got your standard chicken Kiev, which ideally is chicken breast with garlic butter inside.
I don't know that I've ever had one with chicken. It's always that reformed chicken whenever I have it. Yeah, but I mean, it might be breast meat, but it's not like a slice of chicken breast, is it? It's like
if you were making it at home to the recipe, like the original recipe, you'd be slicing open the breast and chucking some frozen garlic butter inside, bread coating it and frying it. But there was a spate where they would put stuff like chicken tikka in the middle and things like that. Well, I'll be honest with you, tried it. Was it
good?
Too bad.
What was there actual lumps of chicken tikka inside the chicken?
No, that would be the best.
It was just tikka sauce.
It was just tikka sauce inside a chicken breast.
I've had the ones with ham and cheese.
Yeah, well, you could get other things, like ham and cheese.
Right.
I don't recall having, I don't know, plum sauce or something inside.
You'd have that in
chicken chow mein and stuff. I'm sure you get worse. But I do like
it's
a bit like what we do with pizza. Where I admire our ability to destroy multiple world cuisines. A stroke.
But that's not us. That's been brought over from the States, hasn't it? We didn't come up with that stuff. Well, I imagine they might have a lab on the outskirts of Glasgow.
We're very much the sort of like test lab for all of those kind of things.
Have you seen those snack boxes which are really famous in sort of Scotland, which we don't have down here?
Oh, the Munchie box.
Yeah, Munchie boxes, which have got like all sorts in them, like onion rings. Chicken wings, curry.
Yeah, no, I read an article about that. It was about 10, 15 years ago or something. It was some guy had written some up. But yeah, he like...
They're like the most calorific thing you can get. They're like £3 or whatever. It's just whatever's in the back of the freezer.
Yeah, it was like a load of chips. Yeah, like just some like chicken pakora, bit of salads, just some dips, bit of fried pizza.
Salads?
Oh, yeah, well, that was what they called it. It was a Glasgow salad, apparently, which was chips. And then
right. But the thing is to remember, for all of you out there going, oh, God, I can't believe they eat that. I eat a Mediterranean diet, thanks. I just eat...
Oh, and doner meat as well, of course.
Doner meat, yeah. I just eat, olives and, some focaccia. Yeah, that's fair enough, right? But you got to remember it's really cold in Scotland, and we live on an island in the North Sea. Like, we can't live on a Mediterranean diet here. We'll die. Like, it's not possible. Our winters are too mild.
You tried growing an olive tree in Aberdeen.
Have you ever tried Scottish wine? Let's just say it's fortified.
Oh, nothing wrong with a bit of Bucky. No, look, I'll be honest with you.
Buckfast isn't done in Scotland, though, is it? That's in Cornwall or something. No,
it's Dorset or something. Yeah. It's some.
So it's a priory or something, isn't it? Like monks make it. Buckfast Abbey.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I can't remember the details. I think it might be Dorset. I can't remember. It's somewhere down in the southwest, I believe.
They sell it.
But it's mostly exported up to Scotland, I believe.
Yeah,
it goes all around the world.
What do they?
You can't find it. I mean, I'd happily give it a go. Sounds all right.
I've had fortified wines before.
So I've had fortified wines. I mean, yeah,
they're all right.
Partial to a bit of port, to be honest with you. But
yeah, I like that. Got quite one or 2 years, can't remember. I got quite into that ginger wine you can buy around Christmas. The ginger fortified wine. It's like a ginger mead. Yeah, that's something like that. Yeah, that's very drinkable and very cheap. So you can tell where I was in my life at the time when I was buying a few bottles of that for the evening.
That one. After a few bottles of that, you obviously would have been.
Well, it's really tasty as well. Really tasty. Yeah. So, Neil, would you like to hear my good news?
Go on. Yeah, no, I'd be delighted to hear good news.
So, in celebration of us completing the first series and the gallivanting success that it was, and all the money we got from all our sponsors, like Snopes and I don't know, Tatler, those kind of people. Okay, I'll let you know. That's why we had.
We might be in the little black book this year, Chris.
I've heard so. Yeah. That's why we had to do the etiquette. It's because Tatler was shadow sponsoring us. So
they wouldn't sign off on that money unless we did it a full series of it, would they? So.
That's right. But yeah, now that contract has ended, they have decided not to renew, and so the non-disclosure agreement has now ended. But in celebration of all of that, I have become pregnant. As you know, I reproduce asexually. And
you've been confusing your life with the plot of an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie again, Chris?
No. I mean, I've told you the story before, but when I was... They were doing a social experiment in sort of South London when I was born at the maternity hospital where I was born, which has now been destroyed by the clergy. And they were injecting newborns with seahorse DNA to see if they could produce some kind of super soldier.
So I'm assuming that this was Church of England because, the Pope was thrown on that kind of research.
No, it was Thatcher. It was Thatcher's government doing it. Obviously, in South London, we didn't vote Tory, so she didn't see the needs. It was like when they put all the fluoride and stuff in.
At that point, in fairness,
made people's teeth go all weird. So I'm after this show, I'm going down to the beach where I'm going to swim a grip onto one of the legs of the pier and.
West Pier?
Yeah, the West Pier. That's where that's my breeding grounds, and I'm gonna
the final thing that'll destroy it.
I'm gonna release my babies into the wild. I come back on land. I'll be female for a bit. I imagine it'll be As I stride out of the sea, having given birth, I imagine it will be like Athena rising from the waves, something like that.
I'm kind of picturing either something like, whatever your progeny, something like that, of a razor head, or possibly that Korean movie, The Host.
I've not seen either of them, unfortunately, but they're kind of they're seahorses, but they're sarcastic. That's basically what they are. And I'm going to name because it's a mixture of seahorse and human. I can only have one or two babies. So if it's a girl, I'm going to name it Pascalita, and if it's a boy, obviously it's going to be called Robert after our first series. And if they manage to get out past the dolphins and the mantas and great whites that live just off our coast, then maybe they'll go on to produce more of my awful hybrid DNA. So just thought I'd let you know that, Neil. Don't worry though, I do return to male form within 2 to 3 weeks, so just in time for Christmas. So talking about things changing, today we're going to look at a vampire story, which isn't from Eastern Europe, the traditional home of the vampires. It's from Rhode Island, and we are looking at the Mercy Brown vampire incident. So, what do you think so far, Neil? You like vampires, don't you? Couldn't eat a whole one.
No, absolutely. Yeah, they're one of your top tier monsters you want to hang around with. I think they're a bane, much like.
Wouldn't mind having a pint with one. Yeah, they're like Nigel Farage.
Yeah, right? Somebody I probably would desperately avoid having a pint with, to be honest with you.
Oh, come on,
you feel
Boris,
like you know
Boris,
what
he
he's
seems
banging
all
on
right.
about. I'd rather a pint with Boris than Nigel Farage, but
really,
yeah, no, I would avoid both, frankly.
What about Trump? Have a pint with him?
To talk about himself. It'd be the same thing with It'd be the same thing with all of them. They just talk about themselves.
But I would have thought that hanging around with me for however many years it's been would have given you training for that.
Oh, you're on that spectrum. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, doesn't mean I actively seek out more of it.
That's why we only talk to each other once a week, and under the guise of a podcast nowadays. I was going to get it court mandated, but it seems to be working out, so we stick to these standards. We'll keep the relationship going. Okay, so a few points there for me. So interesting in that, obviously, a lot of Europeans settled in America, but didn't really know there was kind of like, what's interesting is just having had a quick look at this, there being some sort of vampire folklore in America. Hadn't have thought that was, hadn't thought it travelled too far out of Eastern Europe, to be honest with you. Obviously, Bram Stoker wrote the, wrote Dracula, and a lot of stuff came out of that. But I wasn't aware that was kind of like a big part of American folklore. I think that vampires, or sort of, call them what you will, sort of blood-sucking humanoids, are probably quite. I mean, like there's Chinese vampires, isn't there? So, I think that
that's
they're
true. Actually, yeah, you have the sort of hoppy vampires.
I think they're cross-cultural. And Brian Stoker, pulled on resources to do his novel, but it's not the same as like, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, where she just sort of came up with this.
Yeah, that was invented.
It was invented. Yeah. This is something which I think is a fairly broad thing. I wouldn't be surprised if like native people of America, the First Nation, whatever, have a version of like a sort of night walker or something. I think they probably do, like that kind of gets people at night. I think it's probably a fairly broad church, the vampiric tradition.
A lot of this seems to come down to sort of like some level of superstition, which obviously has nothing with the modern day.
So
we'll get into that later.
Let's get into this. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of Wikipedia, and then we're going to dig in to Mercy Brown. Mercy Brown. So the Mercy Brown vampire incident occurred in Rhode Island, US in 1892. It's one of the best documented cases of the exhumation of a corpse in order to perform rituals to banish an undead manifestation.
I'm just going to immediately need to address that as well, Chris. So one of the...
Not the best.
This is something that happens. Yeah, it's top 10, maybe. It's not,
maybe.
It's not right. Really good exhumation.
There was no fireworks.
I'll be honest with you.
They didn't get a celebrity to do it.
You've kind of left it too late there, haven't you? If you're having to exhume the corpse to banish evil spirits.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Unless you know that, we don't know. Let's see if there's any explanation behind.
You know what? Jumping to conclusions. Maybe they were right all along.
Well,
on the end of this podcast,
I think the little break that you had from doing the analytical work that we do has led to your mind slipping dangerously into the reactionary. So
horrors of subjectivism.
So the incident was part of the wider New England vampire panic. Whee! So we'll have a little dive into that afterwards as well.
I need to understand what that is.
So several cases.
We're in Boston?
No, we're in...
New England, is that Boston?
Well, it is New England, but Boston's Connecticut, isn't it? And this is Rhode Island, which is near, but... there's all those little small states that are kind of north of...
I'll be honest with you, in my head, this is just a load of people speaking like Bostonians. Mark Wahlberg or something.
Hey, she's a vampire!
Yeah.
So, several cases of consumption, or as we know it, tuberculosis, occurred in the family of George and Mary Brown in Exeter, Rhode Island. Friends and neighbours believe this was due to the influence of the undead. An attempt was made to remediate. That's the end of that sentence. She died January 1982, aged 19. So let's have a little bit of the history from Wikipedia. Hopefully the full article, which I'm going to read, doesn't... Actually, I'm just going to do the full article. That'll do, Wikipedia. So this is from allthat'sinteresting.com. And it was checked by Jacqueline Anglis. So it is called Why the Mercy Brown Case Remains One of History's Craziest Vampire Incidents. When Mercy Brown's family started dying off...
People always say this is one of the greatest vampire exhumation stories. You're like, show me the other ones.
Yeah, it's just clickbait stuff, isn't it? Like, that's why.
If you've got more of these, if you've got a top 10, I'd like to see it, and I genuinely mean that.
Well, that's why I have joked, like, in a thumbing my nose at internet culture in our description of the podcast. I've got, welcome to the hottest podcast about urban legends. So when Mercy Brown's family started dying off one by one, the town blamed her, even though she'd been dead for months.
That wouldn't stop her. No better than she ought to be.
The police were in their infancy in Exeter, Rhode Island at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Yeah,
they weren't the most logical group of people, obviously.
No. So in...
The suspect died 2 months ago. That doesn't mean we can rule them out.
You could buy an...
I've been to detective school. I'm not fucking disagree with you on that.
You can buy an alibi. So in...
What, they're undead? What if they're a wizard or witch, whatever, yeah.
Well, they like all the witches and stuff in New England, or they did anyway, didn't they, at the start? So, in 1892, tuberculosis was the leading cause of death in the United States. Then known as consumption, its symptoms included fatigue, night sweats, and the coughing up of white phlegm or even foamy bloods. I mean, that just sounds normal to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a Saturday morning.
Yeah. I knew I should have stuck to 40 a day yesterday.
But, consumption. I mean, we had the big sort of TB hospices and stuff, didn't we? You find with quite a lot of like big old buildings, there was some TB ward or something where people were basically left to die effectively. Yeah. Because they were pre-antibiotics, then that was probably your prognosis. You were either going to recover or you were going to probably more pass away.
So there was no cure or reliable treatment for TB. I'm going to shorten it to TB. Physicians often recommended that a patient affected by the disease should rest, eat well, and exercise outdoors. Of course, these home remedies were rarely successful. People with active tuberculosis has an 80% chance of dying from the illness.
There you go.
The terror surrounding such gruesome death helps explain the madness that befell the small town of Exeter, Rhode Island, at the end of the 19th century. Residents began to fear a vampire named Mercy Brown was causing consumption-related deaths in the town, even though she was already dead from the same disease. Not going to stop her. Task-focused.
Proves it, if anything.
Well, it's got a nice...
Exactly what a vampire would do. Pretend to die.
It's got a nice illustration here of someone using mesmerism, aka hypnosis, which was a common early treatment for TB.
Yeah, I mean... I wonder if Mesmer proposed that as the... Do you think it was just a psychological condition? And it just reminds me a bit. It's one of the early stories of Freud, where he was doing his sort of psychoanalytical sort of techniques, and there was some woman on the couch, and he's like, oh, he thought that some issue she had with her nose was something all in her head
to do with her father.
Anyway, it turned out she'd had some botched surgery, and they'd left some surgical gauze up there, and she nearly died of a brain hemorrhage.
Yeah, I mean,
I can't remember the full facts of the story, but he was sitting there thinking it was like trying to figure out some interpretation. For what's going on there.
But that's the thing with Freud, isn't it? He's been widely discredited.
Oh no, I mean a lot of the stuff. I mean, a friend years ago he worked for the NHS, and he, a lot of Freudian theory is still very current and psychoanalysis. But obviously, there's not everything is. Has that.
Not everything means you want to have sex with your parents.
Course. Sometimes it's a physical thing. Oh yeah, I mean, I don't. There's. I think like some of the cases and some of it are the evidence is a bit thing. It's not as rigorously peer reviewed as it should have been, but
I think
it still uses. It's still a foundation of a lot of psychoanalytical theory, as I understand. But I don't. No, it's just because a friend of mine say he worked in mental health in the NHS, and I was like, when I was in my 20s, kind of like, oh yeah, a lot of that fraud stuff been debunked. Well, no, actually, quite a lot of it is still the basis.
I think the kindest thing I could say is that psychiatry is still in its infancy as a science. That's what I would say to it, as someone who's been to psychiatrists and stuff. It all started when it was, smooth segue into that. That's not, it's not dark. It was just like, like New York.
Oh, no.
Like New Yorkers go and see a psychiatrist.
No, there's nothing wrong with
go for counselling and that kind of stuff. I've never found it useful. But there we go. It all started when a farmer named George Brown lost his wife, Mary Eliza, to TB in 1884. 2 years after the death of his wife, his oldest daughter died of the same illness. Before long, tragedy would strike the Brown family again. As the family members died one by one, people began to suspect the reason was something far more sinister than disease. The rest of George Brown's family appeared to be in good health until his son, Edwin, became seriously ill in 1891. He retreated to Colorado Springs in the hope that he would recover in a better climate. Is Colorado Springs better climate than Rhode Island? Don't know. Mountain air, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know how polluted it would have been in those days, but
I can't imagine it. I think
I thought the weather. I don't know. Actually, yeah.
Well, it's kind of, it was less built up, and it was kind of in the mountainy area, so maybe cleaner air. But whereas stuff like fog from the sea, people would think was bad for you and stuff back in those days, wouldn't they? And Rhode Island's obviously on the Atlantic coast.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, you way back when you did have kind of like stagnant water and stuff. I mean, obviously not from the sea, as you say, but stagnant water was a precursor to sort of
yes.
Drained the marshes whenever they made the encampment.
Yeah, mal air.
Yeah, malaria. Yeah.
However, he returned to Exeter in 1892 in an even worse state. Oh no! I had to remortgage the house to get you out there. Within the same year, Edwin's sister, Mercy Lena Brown, died from TB when she was 19 years old. And with Edwin deteriorating rapidly, his father began to grow increasingly desperate, which you can understand. But it sounds like he had a lot of kids. Meanwhile,
insurance policy, they're all dying off of consumption.
Yeah, got to knock them out.
Assume about 60% of them aren't going to make it through the week.
Needs to get injected up with seahorse DNA like I did. Meanwhile, several concerned townspeople kept telling George Brown about an old folk tale. The superstition claims that, by some unexplained and unreasonable way, in some parts of the deceased relative's body's live flesh and blood may be found what is supposed to feed on the living and who are in feeble health. Now, that's a strange sentence. Let's go through that. Couldn't follow it. Let's go again. By some unexplained and unreasonable way, in some parts of the diseased relative's bodies, live flesh and blood may be found. So they're saying that. Saying that a part of the dead person might still be alive.
Yeah. So are they saying that somebody gets TB and then turns into a vampire? Is that what's happening?
No. So what they're saying is. So by some unreasonable, by some unexplained and unreasonable way, in some part of the diseased relative's bodies, live flesh and blood may be found, which is supposed to feed on the living who are in feeble health. Basically, the myth claims that when members of the same family tree waste away from consumption, it might be because one of the deceased is draining the life force from the living relatives.
Okay, so I get this bit, which is, I'm not quite sure what. It sounded like they were referring there was some part of the body, whatever, which actually is ironically a bit like autoimmune disease. But anyway, so I don't know what's
they're saying that someone who's died of.
Yeah, no, it's this notion, isn't it? So yeah, it's that classic vampiric thing where people around somebody are dying, then they're sucking their life force out or whatever.
Yeah.
So the literal thing would be through blood, but it could be some kind of psychic
vampires. Yeah.
Yeah, through mesmerism, perhaps.
Perhaps through mesmerism. Well, vampires famously can use mesmerism, can't they?
Absolutely.
Get you to do stuff. Go to the shops for me.
Most practitioners of it.
Go and get me a packet of fags now.
Get me 20 pence and a
pepperami.
Yeah, and a pepperami. And some Brannigans. They don't do Brannigans anymore.
Go and find me some Brannigans. But if you have to go more than a mile, don't bother. I'll have some McCoys.
Yes.
And a can of Lilt.
No wonder the vampires are angry. You can't, McCoy's a nice substitute.
Go to the co-op and get me a Ginster's monkey and onion pie. A local newspaper reported Mr. Brown did not place much credence in the old-time theory and resisted their impunities until Wednesday, when the bodies of the wife and two daughters were exhumed. An examination had under the direction of Harold Metcalf, MD of Wickford. Got him all the way.
So he's come a cropper there, hasn't he? They've tried to advise him with the cutting-edge medical science. Your daughter's probably a vampire, mate. We'll sort this one out.
We're going to dig her up. We're going to dig her up, shove a stake in her.
He thought he'd do his own research. And then look what's happened. You've got a vampire daughter now. It's killing off your family.
Indeed. The crypt where Mercy Brown was likely interned. It just looks like a little cowshed, something like that. Indeed, on the morning of March 17th, 1892, a doctor and some locals exhumed the bodies of each family member who had died of TB. They found skeletons in the graves of Brown's wife and eldest daughter. However, the doctor found that the 9-week-old remains of Mercy Brown looked startlingly normal and undecayed.
Case closed. Clear vampire.
Burn it.
I'll be honest with you, American vampires are a bit shitter than European ones by the sound of it. So you kill off your family with consumption and then just decay a bit less.
Yeah, a little bit less decay.
It wouldn't have made a great novel. I'm just going to say I don't think Bram Stoker would have made quite so many films.
The boring vampires.
This is the kind of mythology that he'd put together.
So, furthermore, blood was found in Mercy Brown's heart and liver. This seemed to confirm local fears that Mercy Brown was some kind of vampire who'd been sucking the life from her living relatives. But Neil,
again, why is she dead?
Well, it doesn't mean it was pumping.
I mean, it's a bit less. Well, no, precisely. But it's like, yeah, so you found some blood. I mean, presumably she died after them?
Before.
She died before. So
She was less decomposed.
And she's less decomposed than they are. Yeah, okay, that is weird.
So, Neil, what happened to Mercy Brown after her death? Question mark, title of the next bit.
I assume they chopped off her head and burnt it or something ridiculous.
Hopefully, if they knew what they were doing. The doctor tried to explain to the townspeople that Mercy Brown's preserved state was not unusual. After all, she'd been buried during the cold winter months. So there you go. It's just basically, she was in a freezer. Nevertheless, superstitious locals insisted on removing...
That's why I break into morgues with a flamethrower, Chris, without hiding all the vampires.
It's not the only reason, is it?
Oh, what? Cold things decompose less quickly.
There you go.
So you're part of the conspiracy. Yeah, you're burning too.
Get my super soaker full of paraffin.
I say flamethrower, yeah, I mean...
super soaker full of paraffin.
Water pistol with lighter fluid and a lighter.
You just got a deodorant can and a lighter. So, nevertheless, superstitious locals insisted on removing both her heart and liver and burning them before reburying her. The ashes were then mixed with water and fed to Edwin. Who's Edwin?
I'll assume that
that's the son who went to... That's the one who went to Colorado Springs, yeah. Unfortunately, this supernatural concoction did not cure him, and as people had hoped, Edwin died a mere 2 months later.
Probably, if anything, it's probably made him worse. Probably would have turned into a vampire and then would kill the rest of the family. If there was any left.
Yeah.
By this point, they'd all died.
And here there's an 1896 article from the Boston Daily Globe. That's terrible. That describes how prevalent fears about vampires have become in Rhode Island around the time of Mercy Brown's vampire incident. And the banner headline says, "Believe in vampires. Rhode Islanders who are sure they do exist. Instances told of where the living have been attacked and preyed upon, these representatives of an unseen world." And there's a little...
Examples?
No, not yet. But there's a little kind of etching or wood block thing of a member of the Vampire Party, anti-vampire party. Don't know, just like a bloke with a stick. So, such practices of digging up and burning the deceased over fears of vampire-like creatures were not uncommon in many Western countries until the early 20th century. While Mercy Brown's case was far from an isolated incident, her exhumation came at the end of an era for those vampire-inspired rituals.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, this is just anti-vampire discrimination.
Anti-vamps.
Yeah. They've got their own lifestyle and culture, and he just, no, religious nutcases can't just let people be people.
Exactly. So, headline, The Last New England Vampire. While Mercy Brown had a very short life, we can assume her legacy as the last New England vampire will live on forever, thanks to the stories passed down over the years. Her surviving relatives reportedly saved local newspaper clippings and family scrapbooks, and often discussed the story on Decoration Day, when the town's residents decorated the local cemeteries. That's the fun, isn't it?
That's a very strange one. So you'll never guess. My grandmother was a vampire. Yeah, last one in New England.
Right, give me some more of that glitter for this tombstone.
I assume you cut out her heart and lungs and burnt them.
Yeah. Well, then we fed it to her brother and he died.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Wonderful stuff.
Then we all died of consumption. No.
Have you got any more of that silly string for this Celtic cross over here? So today, Mercy Brown's gravesite is popular with sight-serious and curious visitors who often leave gifts behind, such as jewellery and plastic vampire teeth. I mean, the poor girl died of consumption and then got mutilated after her death. Here's some plastic vampire teeth.
So, this is the thing, posthumous fame, be careful what you wish for. It's not what you want, is it?
Once there was even a note which read, and it's your catchphrase, Neil, "You go, girl."
Yeah, nice.
I didn't know you'd been there.
Some finger clicking.
Clearly, none of this was happening during the vampire scare of the late 19th century. Even though the German scientist Robert Koch had discovered that bacteria would cause tuberculosis in 1882, germ theory had only begun to take hold a decade later. As the contagion was better understood, infection rates then began to go down as hygiene and nutrition improved. Until then, people resorted to pointing fingers at alleged vampires like Mercy Brown, even when they were no longer alive to defend themselves. Easier to win a court case that way. Wait for the person to die.
Yeah, it's almost like acting like a rampant idiot in the middle of a pandemic. Actually,
That's not something that we'd see these days.
Yeah, you wouldn't see modern parallels, obviously. So that's good lord. Yeah.
At least they said vampires rather than a shadowy global elite of paedophile devil worshippers and people putting microchips in vaccines, which is what people say these days.
Some questions. God, yeah, I can't remember what it was on now, but yeah, somebody was trotting out that line about Bill Gates profiteering from vaccines or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, I do like the idea that, well, as somebody pointed out, just banging on about they're obviously putting microchips in the vaccines to keep an eye on us as they're typing all this into fucking Facebook.
Yeah, someone put up a thing.
I wonder whether they do anything to sort of like.
Someone put up something on Facebook the other day. Someone who puts stupid stuff up quite a lot, like not bad stuff, but just like, and it was. Someone in America had like a sign, like a painted sign outside their house saying, we can afford, we can vax the world, but we can't feed the poor. And I thought, yeah, good sentiment, except for the fact that like 4% of Africans have been vaccinated. Do you know what I mean? It's like, we haven't vaxxed the world. Like, I agree with your sentiment. We can clearly do stuff that isn't being done. But I mean, just because most of America and Europe's been vaccinated doesn't mean we've vaccinated the world. So, I think before sort of critiquing everything, you should probably...
You say that, Chris, but they did for smallpox. There's nothing wrong with smallpox.
There's nothing wrong with
left-wing conspiracy.
That's true.
That's why all the men are so weak now.
Yeah, smallpox used to make you strong.
Smallpox, make you eradicate the weak. Get us on our toes. Bring it back, that's what I say. Do you know what? And I say...
Also, you wouldn't have Instagram.
I would absolutely not. I could see somebody coming out of that now. Whatever fucking batshit lunacy coming out of
Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? Like, if we still had smallpox, you wouldn't have Instagram.
Bring back smallpox, brilliant.
Because everyone would have like really pockmarked faces. So,
good.
Yeah, good. Exactly. Maybe...
not having pockmarks is a political decision. Fucking lefty communist cunt.
So, Neil. Now, let's dive in a little deeper to the Great New England Vampire Panic. And this is from the Smithsonian Magazine.
Anyone would know it be Smithsonian. Very fancy.
Very, very fancy. That's America's biggest museum, isn't it? It's that or Ripley's Believe It or Not. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Which one's which? Ripley's Believe It or Not has like a Model T Ford, and the Smithsonian has the man with 3 bollocks or something like that.
Something like that,
yeah. So, 200 years after the Salem witch trial, farmers began convinced that their relatives were returning from the grave to feed on the living. Smithsonian Magazine. So, children playing near a hillside grave mine found the first graves. One ran home to tell his mother, who was sceptical at first, until the boy produced a skull.
All right, well, now that certainly escalated. So firstly, again, stop sending your kids to graveyards to play.
No, they've got all the nice decorations.
What is this? What?
Americans' obsessions with combining playgrounds and graveyards.
You're asking for trouble. You're just going to raise an army of demonic children.
Or Maple Hill, that was the same. And
exactly.
There's loads of them, yeah. I mean, if you're not, I would consider it part of a communist conspiracy to have publicly funded playgrounds for kids to play in. So, let's just
let them knock around the gravestones.
Stick some swings on the gravestones.
Send a load of school-age kids to a graveyard. It's to go and kick the shit out of some vampires.
Yeah, exactly.
Govern.
Okay. So, Because this was Griswold, Connecticut in 1990, police initially thought the burials might be the work of a local serial killer named Michael Ross and taped off the area as a crime scene. Again, if there's a local serial killer, like, why are you kids out playing in graveyards?
Hang on a second. We got kids playing in graves. We've got so the local. What's the local serial killer? How's he involved?
Michael Ross. So the kids found like graves and a skull, and the police thought, oh, there's a serial killer killing people around this area at the moment, so it could be to do with that.
They've only got one skull, haven't they, thus far?
Well, that's all they brought. But the kid brought that as proof that they'd found stuff.
Okay.
So, but the brown, decaying bones turned out to be more than a century old. The Connecticut state archaeologist, Nick Bellatoni.
Whatever they call it, haven't they? Hasn't he? That little bastard. He's been down the ossuary or whatever they call it. So you know when they bury people, and then they dig them up after a while and they stack the bones. I think it's called an ossuary.
Oh, do they?
Well, so because on plots, I think normally in a lot of graveyards you can't. After a number of years, they will, they will just dig up the bones and just shove them into a sort of like a much smaller area. I think I believe so. Yeah,
they did it in Manhattan or something. Yeah, stick it in the ossuary.
Yeah, I think that's all over the world actually, but because you won't, otherwise you wouldn't have it. You'd run out of space for putting more people into the graveyard, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Just burn them. Get down to Creme. You going down Creme? Yeah, let's go down to Creme. So
then you're going to have less vampire problems as well. You see,
exactly. That's why.
Cremation safe. It makes sense.
So the Connecticut state,
or as we've already explored, like a Viking funeral, getting fired out of a cannon
into the centre of town.
All good options,
filled with fireworks.
Yeah.
So the Connecticut,
it's not worth taking a chance. Just you could come back as undead. Why take the chance?
Don't know. I guess it's just some people are funny about their bodies being burnt. When they're dead, they could have beliefs around it.
And you wake up in a coffin and you spend eternity sitting in a little box.
Well, as we've discussed, I'm going to be mummified and interned in that little walk-in wardrobe of Van Hoogstraten's. What have you called it?
Bricked at the back.
Bricked at the back. So, the Connecticut state archaeologist Nick Bellatoni soon determined. That sounds like a good 70s, 80s series. The state archaeologist Nick Bellatoni, be like Petrocelli or Quincy or something like that. But he's solving cold cases.
Absolutely, it's just every week random bodies are turning up at the graveyard.
Yep, kids are running in with new skulls. So he soon determined that the hillside contained a colonial-era farm cemetery. New England is full of such unmarked family plots, and the 29 burials were typical of the 17th and early 18th century. The dead, many of them children, were laid to rest in thrifty Yankee style, in simple wood coffins without jewellery or even much clothing, their arms resting by their sides or crossed over their chests. Except, that is, for burial number 4.
Oh.
Bellatoni was interested in the grave even before the excavation began. It was one of only 2 stone crypts in the cemetery, and it was partially visible from the mine face. Scraping away soil with flathead shovels and then brushes and bamboo picks, the archaeologist team worked through several feet of earth before reaching the top of the crypt. When Bellatoni lifted the first of the large flat rocks that formed the roof, he uncovered the remains of a red-painted coffin and a pair of skeletal feet.
Nice.
They lay.
I thought we were going to find an undead woman in there.
Yeah. And he married her. They lay, he remembers, in perfect anatomical position. But when he raised the next stone, Bellatoni saw that the rest of the individual had been completely ... rearranged. The skeleton had been beheaded. Skull and thigh bones rested atop the ribs and vertebrae. It looked like a skull and crossbones motif, a jolly Roger. I'd never seen anything like it. Bellatoni recalls.
In all his years.
In all my years as the Connecticut state archaeologist, I never seen anything like it. Subsequent analysis showed that the beheading, along with the other injuries, including rib fractures, occurred roughly 5 years after death. Someone had also smashed the coffin. Ugh. The other skeleton and the graveside hill were packaged for a burial, but not JB, as the 50-ish male skeleton from the 1830s became to be called because of the initials spelt out in brass tacks on his coffin lid. He was shipped to the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C. for further study. Meanwhile, Bellatoni started networking. Oh, nice. That's Bellatoni for you, isn't it? Never drops the ball, networking. Started asking...
either networking or screaming, "Dig him up!"
Get the lid off! Show me the skeletons! He's just like... Hey, can we connect on LinkedIn? So he invited archaeologists and historians to tour the excavation, soliciting theories. That's the oldest trade on earth, soliciting theories. Simple vandalism seemed unlikely, as did robbery, because of the lack of valuables at the site. Well, if it was a robbery, there would be a lack of valuables at the site. I would point out Bellatoni.
It's not the sharpest tool in the book.
No, that's why he's only the Connecticut archaeologist.
He puts his best foot forward. He's a trier, bless him. God loves a trier.
Finally, one colleague asked, "Ever heard of the Jewett City vampires?" In 1854, a neighbourhood in Jewett...
Bellatoni ain't heard of Jewett City vampires.
You think I ain't heard of them? I fucking invented them! In 1854, in neighbouring Jewett City, Connecticut, townspeople had exhumed several corpses suspected to be vampires that were rising from their graves to kill the living. A few newspaper accounts of these events survived. Had the Griswold grave been desecrated for the same reason? In the course of his far-flung research, Bellatoni placed a serendipitous phone call to Michael Bell, a Rhode Island folklorist, who had devoted much of the previous decade to studying the New England vampire exhumations. I assume as well as doing a job. The Griswold case occurred...
What's his job?
That was... Where's he getting his funding from?
Money for anything these days.
Money, old rope. Yeah, he probably had a YouTube. The Griswold's case occurred at roughly the same time as the other incidents Bell had investigated, and the setting was right. Griswold was rural, agrarian, bordering southern Rhode Island where multiple exhumations had occurred. Many of the other vampires, like JB, had been disinherited, grotesquely tampered with, and reburied. In light of the tales Bell told of violated corpses, even the posthumous rib fractures began to make sense. JB's accusers had likely been rummaging around in his chest cavity, hoping to remove
burn some stuff and then make a fake medicine, haven't you?
Yeah, and perhaps burn his heart. Having a nice old rummage.
You have the little old lady next door. Force them.
Here you go. Have some heart ash mixed with goat's blood. We're Christian. Headquartered in a charming old schoolhouse.
I don't remember anything in the Bible about vampires.
Don't you?
I'm sure they're in there somewhere.
I think you're forgetting.
Probably the book of...
Think you're forgetting Judas.
Yeah,
the first vampire.
That's actually that's the plot of a movie.
I know.
There's the Butler in it. Yeah, Judas.
So, headquartered in a charming old schoolhouse, the Middletown Historical Society typically promotes such fortifying topics as Rhode Island, grist mill restoration, and Stonewall Appreciation Days. Sounds good. We should go there. 2 nights before Halloween, though, the atmosphere is full of dry ice vapors and high silliness. Fake cobwebs over the exhibition.
Desecrate graves.
Warty gourds crowd the shelves, and a skeleton with keen red eyes cackles in the corner. "We'll turn him off when you start talking," the Society's president assured Michael Bell, who is readying his slideshow. Bell smiles. Although his lectures across the countries have taught at colleges, including Brown University, he's used to people having fun with his scholarships. Vampires have gone from a source of fear to a source of entertainment, he says a bit ruefully. Maybe I shouldn't trivialize entertainment, but to me, it's not anywhere as interesting as what really happens. Bell's daughter, a 37-year-old Gillian, a member of the audience that night, made a futile attempt to tempt her father with the Twilight series, but there's Buffy and Twilight, and there's What My Dad Does, she says. I try and get him interested in the pop culture stuff, but he wants to keep his mind pure. Indeed, Bell seems only mildly aware that vampire appearing everywhere from True Blood to Vampire Diaries has once again sunk its fangs into the cultural jugular. As far as he's concerned, the undead are always with us. The picture of him here in a graveyard being lit by a torch. And who does he look like? He looks a bit like Ian McKellen.
Ian McKellen was a secret vampire hunter.
So this goes on quite a lot.
Yeah, I don't think we want to go through the whole thing. I mean, so
I can basically towards the end. It's a long old
thesis here. Yeah. So basically, I think what we're saying here is that they were thinking that there were a bunch of vampires who were. I mean, I don't know if this is all tied into sort of consumption, kind of like being spread around at the time, but and that was the predicate of sort of people dying and causing these kind of panics. But they were presumably thinking that these these corpses were coming back out of the grave.
Yeah, that's unspecified.
And killing folk and then sort of going back for a nap.
It seems like they weren't really sure how they were doing it. Whether they were
I don't know what kind of. Yeah, I don't know
whether they were doing it via sort of some unknown Mycenaean family connection. Don't know. Yeah. It doesn't. What's this?
It reminds me a little bit. There was a panic in sort of Europe or in Britain around the same time where they thought that people were being buried alive. Well, actually, probably in America as well, because Edgar Allan Poe, I think, was obsessed.
Well, that's why people started having bells attached, so they'd have a pipe that went down into the coffin with and then attach a bit of string, and there'd be a bell next to the gravestone, so that people, if they woke up and had been buried alive, could pull the thing and it would ring the bell, and that's where the phrase "dead ringers" comes from.
Oh, there you go.
So it says here. It says here that. So this gives you an idea of the kind of zeitgeist at the time, I guess. So, while New England farmers may have been guided by something like reason, the spiritual climate of the day was also hospitable to vampire rumours. Contrary to their puritanical reputation, rural New Englanders since the 1800s were a fairly heathen lot. Only about 10% belonged to a church. Rhode Island, originally founded as a haven for religious dissenters, was particularly lax. Christian missionaries were at various points dispatched there from more godly communities. The missionaries came back and lament that there's no Bible in the home or no church going whatsoever, says Linford Fisher, a Brown University colonial historian. You have people out there essentially in cultural isolation. Mary Olive, Lena's sister, joined the church just 2 weeks before she died. In place of organised worship, superstition reigned. Magic springs with healing powers, dead bodies that bled in the presence of their murderers, people buried shoes by their fireplace to catch the devil if he tried to come down the chimney. They nailed horseshoes above their doors to ward off evil and carved daisy wheels, kind of colonial hex signs, into their door frames. So it sounds like they'd fucked off religion at this point and then gone back to paganism.
Well, you should try and trusted methods, because I tell you what, we put that horseshoe up. Since we put that horseshoe up on the devil's not come down it once.
No.
So you tell me.
Well,
that's just science.
Well, it's
how many times have you seen the devil visiting this house?
Well, your house,
yeah.
Several, but that's because you invited him.
That's because I summoned several occasions.
During one of our sex magic parties.
Well, yeah.
Crowley-esque style sex magic. No, the thing is, all of this, it's basically Pascal's wager, isn't it? Do I believe in the devil? Not really. But does it harm me to bang up some horseshoes over every door, bury some boots under the chimney, carve a daisy wheel into my front door of my rented flat? No, it doesn't cost me anything, and if it does work, then that's great.
Yeah.
So,
and he was French. You can tell he was smart.
Yeah, definitely. So, this Smithsonian thing's too long, so I'm not going to read through it. But if people want to have a look at it, then
self out, really.
Yeah, knock yourself out. I've got better things to do with my day. So, Neil, shall we go through our it's being introduced this year to colleges around New England, our scoring system.
Yeah, in place of their belief in vampires.
It's in tandem with it.
Oh, right. Okay. You want to keep the old things flourishing.
So, Neil, I'll let you go first with spookiness.
So, I'm not on it. I mean, I suppose, yeah. So we seem to be blaming vampires for people dying of consumption in one of our audios. I'm not quite sure what else they've been getting up to. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I suppose I get the point is that they're just pretending to be dead, or they're just dead for something. Presumably they rise from the grave and get up to vampiric shenanigans. But
there's nothing to suggest that though. It's literally just trailing.
Well, I can assume that's what they're thinking is happening because. There seems to have been this panic, and well, I suppose what's spooky is me having consumption. Then you try and force feed me some ash, fucking fake medicine from my sister's cremated remains.
So apparently, even at the time, people were looking at the vampire panics in New England as a complete anachronism. They're going, what?
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, no. I'm going to think.
So it just sounds like they're a bit backwards.
I was thinking there was nothing massively spooky, but actually, the notion of mass hysteria and people. I mean, it doesn't sound like there was massive harm out of this one. There was just a bunch of. I mean, there's
corpses being desecrated.
Yeah, I mean, that's not. I mean, don't get me wrong. That's less than ideal. It's not great. It's horrible, but these are not.
Yeah, no one's been burned.
It wasn't like a load of people had died of preventable illnesses or things like this. But they would have died of consumption anyway. So the fact that they were just trying to apply remedies that were useless doesn't mean that they were, overlooking remedies that would have actually worked. But no, the notion of kind of like this kind of hysteria and kind of like people just being led along with those kind of things is a bit spooky, I suppose. I mean, that's not really. So the vampire itself doesn't scare me, but the fact that everyone gave credence to these stories of vampires is a bit spooky. So I'm going to give it a 6.
6, nice one. So I'm going to put myself. I mean, obviously, to me, none of this is spooky, but that's looking with hindsight. I think if I put myself in the shoes of the people who are really superstitious, living out in the sticks. Probably lots of woods and stuff around, and you believe in all the, devil, and you'd had a couple of hundred years before people being burnt as witches and all that. I don't know, but and you don't have a clear answer to why these people are getting all frail and dying and coughing up blood and stuff. It's the invisible threat. It's an invisible threat, isn't it? So you don't know. So I imagine it's very scary for them. And they, when, as is often the case, when modern science can't give you answers, people fall back on superstition or religion or whatever. So I imagine it was a very scary time for them to be around. I don't find any of it scary, but I think, I'll go with you. I'll give it a 6-0. So believability. So it all happened, so that's very believable. So it's obviously going to get a high score. Was it people? But it's explained. It was people with TB. They weren't vampires. The corpse being not as deteriorated as ones that had been buried more recently was because it was buried in the frozen ground. So that just makes sense. Even a doctor at the time knew that. So the vampire part of it's nonsense. But it did all happen. So I'm going to give that a 6 again, Neil.
Okay, I'm going to go slightly lower on this just because I think it doesn't hold up over time. So believability at the time, I absolutely get that, you've got this sort of region where, people are a bit more believing of like old folklore and things like that. And the superstitions. So yes, it would have been probably more believable at the time, but I think you're probably, hopefully you're not going to have too many people who still cling to a superstition about vampires in this day and age. And I would hope that there's not, graves being dug up in the last 20 years, to, just in case somebody's going to come up and start killing people.
I think it's just around the corner.
Yeah.
I mean, there are actual people who now believe that zombies could exist. Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
I mean, and that's just stupid.
Well, we're probably not far off already. Yeah, so I'm going to give it a slightly lower score on that basis and give it a 4. So, but it would have been believable at the time, but just because it's not, shouldn't have stood the test of time.
Okay, Reach. So I'll go first here because I didn't mention any stuff around the Reach. So it has been involved in popular culture. There's been short stories. Bram Stoker knew about the case. That's something. And apparently based on novel's character Lucy Westenra on her. It's referred to in a Lovecraft thing. It's been a series called Lore. I know that. Yeah, that was so, and it's been in like Monster Quest and stuff like that. So it's been around. It's fairly well known. I'd never heard of it before, but it seems fairly well known in America. I doubt it's known very much outside of America. Possibly not all that well in America, despite the fact that it's the craziest vampire story. But it's 130 years old, and it's still been talked about. I mean, it's okay. Breach, I'll give it. I think it's only a 4 for me. Breach. Neil.
Yeah, similar. I mean, the fact that it's still around, but it seems like more of a historical curio than sort of like a folklore thing. So I don't suppose. Again, I'm making an assumption here, but I don't suppose there's too many people accusing their neighbours of being vampires anymore. So whilst it's still knocking around as a historical footnote, if you like, I don't, it's not it's not like anyone believes anymore that these people were vampires or that there could have been a vampire roaming around New England, and by this mysterious thing, it just seems to have been fairly clearly sorted out that it was just people dying of consumption, and then some people who didn't really understand what was going on because they didn't have a grasp of germ theory at the time, blaming outside forces or some sort of superstition. So I don't think the posterity argument holds up that much either, and I mean, I've never heard of it, but that's no surprise. There's most of these. You're right. I'd never heard of the kind of like New England vampire hysteria. So that's quite interesting. But I don't think the Reach is probably much outside of America. So yeah, I think a 4 is probably fair enough.
Okay, and narrative premise, Neil. I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's quite interesting actually. So I think it's quite an interesting little fact that in that area of New England there wasn't much religion, and then people sort of leaned on the kind of heathen superstitions. You'd have a lot of kind of, and the thing is, I think to rely in that kind of agrarian area or that kind of sort of like out in the country.
It's nice.
You're going to have a lot of practical folk remedies.
It's nice when the elders of the church aren't shouting at people, people fall back to paganism. I love that. Just everyone just falls back to paganism when they're not being actively shouted at.
Well, then they go up and see St. Peter and they, in trouble. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show, doesn't it, that people's fallback position will be to try and, manifest some kind of exterior motive or whatever it is,
Yeah, education wouldn't have been great in the rural 1800s.
No, and you'd have to be very self-reliant. So, you would have had, formal education and all the rest of it, but, a lot of it would have been based on their own kind of observations of things and all the rest of it. So, I think there's quite some quite interesting narrative here, just in terms of the whole. The one thing I think that takes it down a notch for me is these vampires don't seem to be doing anything particularly interesting. I think that the sort of mass hysteria element's quite interesting. I think there's quite an interesting kind of, and there's an interesting sort of parallel with the way things are happening at the moment with social media. But and people leaning back on superstitions because they don't trust the established authority of the day. So it would have been the church back then. You think it would be leaders and kind of scientists and things these days. So that's all quite interesting, and that's quite interesting part of the narrative to me. Although it's kind of sits on the edges, I suppose. But what brings it down a notch is the fact that the vampires aren't actually doing anything particularly. There's
boring.
I don't know what their end game is. They're not like even in Twilight they made them.
They're trying to have sex with teenagers.
Yeah.
I didn't agree with their end game, but they had one.
Yeah, it's not good, but it's
they've got a mission statement.
So that brings it down a bit. So I'm going to middle and go for a 5.
5, yeah. So the vampires are dull as fucking shit. Right, they're boring. They don't seem to like.
Why some red hot slow decomposition action?
Yeah, they're slightly slowing down the decomposingness, but they seem to be they're sucking the life out of like members of their family, but really to no benefit. They're not doing anything.
They'll die themselves later on.
They're not doing anything with it. Do you know what I mean? It's just like a real dick move. If I'm going, you're going to. But yeah, I think the kind of sociological stuff is more interesting, kind of about like the people all going sort of getting really into vampires and paganistic and that kind of stuff, only 130 years ago. And the thing is as well, it is quite rural, but it's not like Rhode Island is a big state. Do you know what I mean? It's one of the little ones. It's not a big state. It's not far away from fucking New York City or Boston. So it's not like it's like somewhere like in the middle of nowhere in Montana or something. But then I think what feeds into it is the fact that they have got history of witch trials and all of that kind of stuff. Basically, they brought a lot of stuff from the old world over, and it kind of stuck up there up in New England because it's kind of the oldest continually inhabited area from the Western point of view, from the settlers. Yeah. So that's interesting. But yeah, the vampires are shit. So for that reason, it's a 4 from me, which gives it an overall score of 39. So just under half marks.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. Not too bad at all. So
there wasn't much behind it, but there you go.
There wasn't much behind it, but it's something that did happen, and that always boosts the scores. Always boosts the scores. So if you know of any vampire myths which were one of the other crazy ones, because it seems to intimate that this is one of many, then
any other reasons for exhuming corpses?
Yeah, then do get in touch at herb.legends.pod@gmail.com. But apart from that, enjoy the rest of your week. Try and not exhume too many corpses. And that's it from this week's Urban Legends. Goodbye.